The story begins in an American city controlled by gangs. We see a man named Brian running through the streets, and it's clear that he is in a state of shock. We learn that he is chasing the gang members who killed his son. After a while, Brian reaches one of the gang's cars. He grabs a metal rod from the ground and smashes the car window, trying to force them to get out and face him. But at that moment, the gang's car starts chasing Brian until they corner him in a side street. Then the gang leader, whose name is Playa, gets out of the car, raises his gun at Brian, and shoots him in the neck, knocking him unconscious. Shortly after, the ambulance arrives and takes Brian to the hospital. His condition is extremely serious, so they quickly take him into surgery and remove the bullet from his neck. Luckily, they managed to stop the bleeding in time and save his life. Unfortunately, his vocal cords are severely damaged and Brian loses his voice. Later, we see Brian in the intensive care unit, while his wife Saya is asleep on the couch beside him. At that moment, a detective named Dennis enters the room and approaches Brian to make sure that he is still alive. After that, Dennis leaves his card on the table so Brian can contact him once he recovers, allowing him to help him get justice for his son. After a few days, Brian wakes up and we notice that his health has started to improve significantly, but of course his morale is completely shattered. Later we see Brian standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection and trying to scream or make any sound, but he can't. After that, the hospital provides him with a voice device, which is used by people who have lost their voices so they can communicate through it. But Brian isn't happy with the situation and refuses to use the device, so his wife hugs him and tries to comfort him. Sometime later, Brian is discharged from the hospital, and we see him in the car with his wife. He keeps staring sadly at the children on the street. After that, he arrives home with his wife, but at first, Brian refuses to get out of the car because he doesn't want to go inside the house after the death of his son. However, his wife keeps encouraging and comforting him until he finally gets out of the car. Then Brian stands in the backyard and keeps remembering himself playing with his son, but suddenly, all those memories disappear before his eyes. Brian can't accept that he will never see his son again. Of course, his wife tries to comfort him and console him, even though she is just as sad as he is. Brian sees the Christmas tree and the presents he had prepared for his son, but unfortunately, he never got the chance to make him happy with them. Brian breaks down in tears, and his wife quickly goes over and hugs him to comfort him. Brian then gets up and starts smashing things around the house like a madman. At that moment, he sees the news of his son's death in the newspaper, so he quickly tears the newspaper apart because he refuses to believe that his son is actually dead. Then he looks at his wife sadly and begs her to help him because he can't go on living like this. Of course, his wife breaks down in tears because she doesn't know how to help him. As the days pass, Saya returns to work and tries to live her life normally so she can move on from the death of her son. Unlike Brian, who locks himself in the storage room all the time and thinks about only one thing: getting revenge on the people who killed his son. Of course, his wife is worried about him and doesn't know what to do. Later, Brian enters his son's room and keeps looking at every detail of it. He then lies down on his son's bed and imagines himself hugging him, but he snaps out of his imagination and starts crying. After a while, Brian goes outside and sits alone in the backyard, remembering the time when the incident happened to his son. At that time, Brian and his wife were playing with their son in the backyard and celebrating Christmas together. At the same moment, the gang's cars suddenly appeared next to them, and the gang members started shooting at each other. By accident, one of the bullets hit Brian's son, killing him instantly. Of course, when Brian remembers these events, he completely breaks down and anger starts taking control of him, so he goes back to the storage room and gathers all the bottles of alcohol so he can stop drinking and sober up. At that moment, he decides to dedicate his entire life to getting revenge on this gang. The next day, Brian arrives at Detective Dennis's office to find out what he wanted from him. Brian waits for a long time at the office, but Dennis doesn't show up. By chance, Brian sees a picture of Playa, the gang leader, and his men hanging on the wall because they have been wanted by the law for a long time. So Brian takes pictures of all the gang members and goes to the elevator to leave. By chance, Dennis sees him and they make eye contact. At that moment, Dennis feels that Brian is planning something. After a while, Brian returns home, hangs the gang members' pictures on the wall, and starts planning to take revenge on them one by one. As the days pass, we see Brian training brutally every day to prepare himself to face the gang. He also goes to learn how to shoot at a shooting academy. After that, he goes and buys a large number of weapons and starts modifying his car to make it stronger. Of course, his wife Saya notices the frightening change in her husband's personality and becomes very worried about him. She feels that he is going to hurt himself and cause problems for her. Even though Saya loves him, she decides to separate from him because she believes that this will be better for both of them. Brian continues his combat training, and afterward he takes his car to an empty car lot and spends a long time there practicing how to drive the car. 3 months pass, and Brian feels that he is finally ready to face the gang, so he goes to their headquarters and keeps watching them from a distance, taking many pictures of them. After that, Brian returns home and keeps pushing himself during his training. He also hangs pictures of the gang members in front of him to motivate himself and keep him from giving up. We also notice that he has become extremely skilled at using pistols and driving cars. One day, we see Brian leaving the supermarket. At that moment, he sees a child who looks exactly like his son. Brian keeps staring at him and then hugs him. At that moment, the child's mother sees him from a distance, so she quickly comes over, takes her son, and leaves. At that moment, Brian receives a message from his wife, Saya. She tells him that his parents are very worried about him because he hasn't contacted them in a long time. She asks him to contact them and let them know that he is okay, but Brian ignores the message and then goes to get into his car. At that moment, he looks beside him and sees the gang leader handing out money to the people in the neighborhood. Brian pulls out his knife and prepares to go and take him down, but he hesitates and gets scared. At the same moment, one of the gang members appears in front of him, hits him, and knocks him to the ground. Then a girl from the gang comes over and throws juice at him to mock him. She leaves the girl and walks away. Of course, Brian becomes very upset with himself because he was too afraid to confront them, so he goes back home and takes out all his anger during his training. That night, Brian sneaks into the home of one of the gang members named Anthony. He attacks him from behind, hits him on the head, and knocks him to the ground. Then Brian kidnaps Anthony and takes him home, where he ties his hands and legs. Brian keeps beating him, then gives him a piece of paper and a pen and orders him to write down every detail about the crimes he and the gang have committed since they took control of the city. But Anthony refuses to write anything. Suddenly, Anthony attacks Brian and stabs him in the leg with a knife. Brian hits him and pushes him to the ground until Anthony loses his strength and gives up. A few days later, we see Brian getting ready and preparing for his second confrontation with the gang. But first, he goes to his wife Saya's house and watches her from a distance while she is drawing a picture of their son. After that, Brian goes to visit his son at the cemetery. He has brought a gift for his son and leaves it at his grave. That night, we see Detective Dennis sitting at home. Then he hears someone knocking on the door, so he goes to open it. He is shocked when he finds Anthony, the gang member, tied up with an envelope next to him. Dennis quickly calls the police, and after a while, they arrive and arrest Anthony. After that, Dennis opens the envelope and finds a letter from Brian telling him that he has decided to take revenge on the gang without the help of the police. Dennis also finds a flash drive inside the envelope, so he plugs it into his laptop and finds a lot of pictures and information about the gang. It also contains the locations of all their meeting spots and detailed information about every crime they have committed. Meanwhile, we see Brian on his way to the gang's headquarters, but on the way, he sees a group of Playa's gang members attacking a girl. At first, Brian hesitates to help her and drives away, but then he changes his mind and turns back. He hits one of the gang members and stabs him, causing the man to fall onto the roof of Brian's car. Brian speeds up the car to make him fall to the ground, but he fails. At that moment, the gang member reaches his hand through the car window and tries to shoot Brian, but Brian is faster. He takes the gun from him and finishes him off. After that, Brian stops the car and feels sick, so he throws up because it's the first time he has ever killed someone. After a while, Brian arrives in front of the gang's headquarters and throws a bag over the wall. One of the gang members sees the bag, picks it up, and takes it to the gang leader. Playa is shocked when he finds the fingers of one of his gang members inside the bag. After that, Brian arrives at the headquarters of another gang. At that moment, a fight breaks out between Playa's gang and the other gang. Of course, the police are unable to control the situation, so Brian enters the fight and starts randomly shooting at both gangs. At the same time, we see one of Playa's gang members on a video call recording the battle and showing it to Playa. Brian sees the man, so he crashes his car into him. Then he gets out, kills him, and takes his phone. At that moment, Playa realizes that Brian is the one hunting down his gang, so Playa quickly sends a message to one of his men named Ruiz and orders him to kill Brian. In return, he will give him $5,000. At that moment, Brian drives past Ruiz and his gang to provoke them. The gang starts chasing Brian, so he grabs his gun and starts randomly shooting at them. He manages to take down one of them, then Brian speeds up his car until he finds himself on a side street. He is shocked to find 3 gang members standing in front of him. Brian quickly grabs his gun and takes them out. Then he speeds away in his car and starts shooting at the gang's cars behind him and in front of him. In the end, Brian manages to defeat them all, but at the same time, one of the gang members appears behind him on a motorcycle. Brian lures him into a side street, then corners him and easily takes him out. At that moment, we see Detective Dennis in his car. He is hesitant about whether or not he should report Brian to the police, but in the end, he decides to help Brian take revenge on the gang. Besides, the police have no real authority over the city anyway, and they won't be able to get justice for him. Dennis guesses that Brian is heading to the gang's headquarters to take revenge on Playa, so he quickly heads there to help him. We go back to Brian, who is sitting in the street taking a short rest. At that moment, a message arrives on the phone he stole from the gang, informing him that the remaining gang members will enter the secret headquarters in 5 minutes. Brian quickly gets up, gets on the motorcycle he took from the gang, and heads toward the headquarters. After a while, he sees the gang's cars entering the garage, so he follows them inside before the garage door closes. Brian grabs his gun and starts taking them out one by one. In the end, Brian shoots the fuel tank of one of the cars, setting the gang members on fire. After that, Brian goes up the stairs that will lead him to the gang leader's location. Meanwhile, we see Playa dancing with his girlfriend in the room, completely unaware of what is happening downstairs. At that moment, Brian is going up the stairs when a large number of gang members appear in front of him. He gets into a shootout with them and starts taking them out one after another. Brian gets shot, but he is wearing a bulletproof vest, so all his injuries are only superficial. After that, Brian reaches the gang's headquarters and starts checking the place to make sure that no one is there. Then he gets a hand grenade and attaches it to an invisible wire at the entrance of the door so that anyone who comes in after him will be killed immediately. After that, Brian continues on his way and keeps searching everywhere for Playa, but at that exact moment, Ruiz appears from behind him, and it turns out that he is still alive. He attacks Brian and throws him to the ground. Brian quickly gets back up and tries to hit him, but he can't. Ruiz grabs Brian by the leg, throws him to the ground again, and then starts beating him repeatedly. At that moment, 2 gang members arrive, but they fall into the trap Brian set and are killed instantly. Ruiz hears the sound of the explosion, and Brian takes advantage of the opportunity. He attacks Ruiz and starts beating him. At the same time, Dennis arrives at the gang's headquarters and starts searching everywhere for Brian. Meanwhile, Brian is still fighting Ruiz. In the end, Brian manages to grab a weapon and takes Ruiz out. After that, Detective Dennis arrives and finds Brian. At first, Brian becomes worried when he sees him, so he raises his gun at him, but Dennis tells him that he is there to help him, so Brian feels relieved and lowers his weapon. At that exact moment, Playa's girlfriend starts shooting at them. Unfortunately, both Brian and Dennis get shot, but they don't die. Brian sneaks up on the woman and points his gun at her, intending to kill her, but he hesitates and refuses to kill her because she is a woman. The woman takes advantage of the opportunity and shoots Brian with her gun. Then she shoots Detective Dennis in the stomach. Brian grabs his gun and takes her out. Brian gathers all his strength and goes to confront the gang leader, Playa. As soon as Playa sees Brian, he shoots him with his gun. Then he gets closer to him to deliver the final shot to his head. But Detective Dennis appears at the last moment and shoots Playa with his gun. Brian quickly gets back up and starts strangling Playa until he takes him out. In the end, Brian loses all his strength and lies down on the ground, while Detective Dennis lies down beside him. Brian keeps remembering all his old memories with his son until both he and Dennis die. Sometime later, we see Brian's wife visiting her son's grave. She is reading the letter Brian sent her before he died. In the letter, he apologizes to her for letting her down and for not being the perfect husband, but he tells her that he couldn't go on living without taking revenge on the people who killed their son. At the end of the letter, he tells her that he loves her and their son very much, says goodbye to her, and that's how the movie ends. If you were Brian, would you dedicate your entire life to hunting down the gang members who killed your son, even if it meant losing your wife and eventually your own life? Or would you choose to let go of your anger and try to rebuild your life with your family? Let us know what you would choose in the comments.